Welcome back to the Whiskey Politics Podcast. I'm Dave Sussman, your host, Ricochet.com, and here at FreedomFest, and I'm sitting here with James Paek. James Paek is a human rights activist. He's speaking here at FreedomFest this week, and I thought it would be really interesting to really get some perspective of what is happening right now. North Korea is in the news every single day. We're hearing about what's happening with the regime, and are they threatening the world, especially locally with Seoul, Korea. And so you're speaking here and you're talking about all of that and how it's impacting America. What are your thoughts on all of this that we're seeing so much of right now in the news?
So, as we know that we hear in the news that North Korea keeps sending ballistic missiles, in the air, trying to, support for the Kim regime and everything, all of these things, that is happening. Right now, as of this situation that South Korea right now is trying to pursue a diplomatic engagement, a dialogue to actually, have, engagement with the North. And for so many years, for at least a decade, we have seen a closed-off system where, there's been, more like strict, policies towards North Korea where we cannot have engagement with them. And basically, Moon Jae-in, of course, the South Korean president there, is trying to make his way to, have a dialogue with them. And I think that's the different policies, that they had, within the past 10 years, or at least a decade or so. And if you compare it to U.S., of course, Trump is trying to engage with, more, military provocation, stronger sanctions towards North Korea at this point. And obviously there is some differences between those two, different presidents that we have seen. But I think if they're willing to work together, onto it, I think they will achieve a peaceful unification, but also a peaceful, dialogue with the North, as long as, it's not like any crazy things is about to happen.
We go back 20 plus years, and I remember with the Clinton administration, and they sent Madeleine Albright over, and they thought that they had this great deal. And the deal was essentially somewhat of an appeasement, where we allow them to continue to, foster this effort to create missiles, but at a slower pace. It's now 22, 23 years later. What options do you see this current administration have, if any? Because there are so many different ways for this entire house of cards to fall, correct?
Right. So as I mentioned, military provocation is one of the sanctions, another dialogue with them, or simply not to have dialogues at all. And so, as you said, mentioned about Clinton's administration, they've been, more towards engagement policy and everything. And things have been, gone well, but then as Bush started to came in, he was more like a strict policy, making sure that, there are more sanctions towards them and, basically not to have engagement at all. But then after decades of sanctions and everything that's been, going on, it's no diplomatic resolution has been happening. So I would say, having the most effective way to have dialogue with them is to have engagement and dialogues with the North. You may think that it's not a good idea to have a dialogue because they have for massive human rights abuse there as well, and I'm aware of that, of course. But obviously we can not use a military action to actually cause that to have a massive casualties between both sides of Korea. Of course, we have troops in South Korea, and we don't want to see any of the American citizens also getting massive casualties. So I would say having a dialogue, but at the same time, finding a balance between dialogue and sanctions is quite an effective way to do it, and that's what Moon Jae-in, the South Korean president, is trying to do. So his stance was basically, he agrees some of what Trump's policies are, but he absolutely believes that, sanctions, he done it, but then obviously, within the past couple of weeks, he decided, it's time to make my own move. So he's making, his own move, and, I'm kind of seeing, I want to, it's kind of getting interesting to see, what's going to happen in the next upcoming months to see how that plays out.
I read a lot. I've watched some documentaries. I'm very interested in the Hermit Kingdom, North Korea. I think from a psychological standpoint, it's a fascinating case study, right, as a sovereign state. one of the problems that they're having is that there are so many of their slaves, if you will. Okay, their citizenry are many of them are kept in camps and abject poverty. That so many of them try to defect. Now, many of them defect into China, and I've seen a lot of different video where there are coyoted, if you will, down through China into Thailand. And talk to me about China and what role can China play in this? Because there was a meeting between President Trump and the Chinese president back in the spring, where he felt that there was going to be some momentum with China, and they seem to have since pulled back. What role can China play?
I would say, as you mentioned, that most North Korean defectors are actually defecting from North Korea because they want to have new opportunity. They want to escape from atrocities, from totalitarian government. The most reason why a lot of North Korean defectors, especially there are women, but also we've seen some males also defecting because they don't actually believe what the leader says. It's all controlled by the state, and because of that, they want to have political freedoms. They want to have some economic freedoms, and it's all about freedom. And the way that obviously China could do is to not block from these defectors from coming in and trying to find an escape route to make their way to a third country and escape and successfully make it to South Korea by airplane or something like that. So having open to immigration, not closing it, so that's the most effective way that China could do at this point.
Okay. The greater economy, China. If you're talking about how South Korea, you have Japan, you have Asia from a standpoint of an economic power, and then you have this tiny little sliver which is North Korea, right? Doesn't China have more leverage than anybody because they're the biggest trading partner out of a region that is replete with money?
Well, obviously, somewhat, I would say China does have leverage, but it's also South Korea also has the leverage as well because, South Korea has been known as the middle power. They cannot, basically have the difficulties making a decision on what kind of policy they want to pursue towards North Korea. So when you talk about geopolitical aspects of that, as I mentioned earlier, of course, how the geopolitics works is that, China, Russia are obviously the two sides of, engagements. They believe that obviously war should not happen. Should be non-existent. They just think they're fearing that if war, is the case, if that is the option on the table from what U.S. and Japan wants, then they will fear that it's going to cause a massive casualties, but also a huge amount of influx of, North Korean defectors coming in, and they just could not take any, cannot take any responsibility for it because it's so much accountability that they have. So there's a lot of uncertainties and challenges for them in the future and what they have to tackle, and that is one concerning for them. Now, if you look at U.S. and Japan, for example, they're much more like a hardline approach where they were saying that, because there's a massive human rights, and we're so tired of North Korea keeps sending ballistic missiles in the air, all of this. I mean, yeah, of course, because their government is run by totalitarian. Their regime has to get, remain powerful because that's what the system that they created ever since, the liberation of both Koreas was going on. Because that's what they have to do as a living. They, gain for power. That's what the system has been created. That's what the Constitution says. They want what they wanted for the United States is that they wanted to accept them as a nuclear state, which the United States does not accept at all. They don't accept it because that's going to, create some conflicts and tensions around, throughout the world, and it's a threat from around the world. So
you talk about the nuclear threat, and you're also talking about the geography there. It's a really, really small neighborhood. Seoul, North Korea, where your parents are from, right?
Yes.
South Korea. I'm sorry, South Korea. It's right, literally on the DMZ, practically. With what the greater region there is 10 million people in the city, 20 million greater. Is that correct?
I think it's probably right now the population is probably 50 million at this point. Compared to North, it's like I think it's 25 million.
Okay, but what I'm talking about the city of Seoul, where there's skyscrapers, and I mean, from a threat standpoint, we hear that North Korea could shoot some missiles. They can hit the west coast of the United States, maybe Alaska, Hawaii, whatever it may be. That region is directly under threat. It's been under threat for decades. Right? But now you've got this new head of state in North Korea, which a lot of people are now considering as crazy. I mean, I don't know. Is he really crazy? And, he's flexing his muscle. He sent up more missiles in just the past couple of years than his father and his grandfather did combined. Right? Where does this end? What does this look like in 6 months, a year, or 5 years from now?
I would say, that everybody's concerned about what's going on in South Korea, especially the citizens within that inner cities close to the borders, what's going to happen to them, But if you listen to the South Korean citizens, even I include myself, when also got scared by this threat a lot of times when they decided to send nuclear missiles or whatever it is. They've been obviously, got used to it from these threats because most of the South Korean citizens actually said, well, nuclear threat isn't a threat to them because they've been, been obviously, receive a threat for multiple times and they got used to it. So, I don't think it's not, a threat to them at all. But if you look at the U.S., standpoint, we see a threat, they're doing this, to trying to, making sure that the regime stands powerful, whatever it is. So, because that's how the system is created. They have three types of things that they said on the Constitution. It says self-reliance, peaceful reunification, and obviously national unity. If those three things are not met, then unfortunately they're going to keep threatening on the North, to the U.S. and so many other parts of the country. So that's what it is. Right.
Well, it's fascinating, and I think from the standpoint of watching this evolve, it's a little scary, right? I mean, I from an academic standpoint, I don't know what the options are. Dialogue doesn't seem to be working. Sanctions may or may not be working, but China needs to really be the impetus behind that. This is a problem that I'm glad I don't have to wrestle with if I'm living in Washington, D.C., because I don't know what the answer is here.
For me, for my response, it's really difficult, which policy is effective, whether it's sanctions or dialogues. We've been doing that for multiple times. Either sanctions is not working for at least a decade, dialogues, they're refusing it right now, because, they're just not willing to, And so, which options are there? Should we rely on China to, making sure that enforcement of sanctions are in place to make sure that, the Kim regime will not obviously use any of those monies that are coming from whatever the source is that keeps, keeping its legitimacy to gain its power,
Right.
So I would say it's really, if China could not handle this solution or, they're not willing to provide open its borders to North Korean defectors to escape, effectively or so, then I would say the most effective way that, they could do, I would say to them, is obviously, revolutionize, spread activism. But unfortunately they can't. But you see North Korean defectors on the media, they come out and, talk about, their experiences and so forth and so on.
Right.
And they're obviously the backbone of changing the reality of what North Korea is all about. And we have seen that for at least, couple of years right now, and we've seen them, activists, talking about their life experiences. So it's a lot of, bad tragedies happening there.
Well, appreciate you taking the time, James. Where can people find you? I know you're speaking here at FreedomFest. Is there any place online that you have?
Oh, actually, I don't have a website, but you could go, type my name, James Paek, it's Paek, and you could find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I also written several articles. I work for SFL, as a blogger.
Right.
And what we talked about is, talking about South Korea, North Korea, all of this, issues been going on. I wrote a blog about it, so they could check out and, type my name, FreedomFest.net/SFL, and they could find it on Google and read my article.
Greatly appreciate it, James. Thanks for stopping by. We're going to have to obviously watch this very, very closely as things evolve. And thank you for watching. I appreciate you taking the time as well, the listener. And you can find us at whiskeypolitics.net. Find us on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. Your 5-star rating will be very helpful in helping others find us, as well as ricochet.com. Thanks again, James Paek.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.